you, Andrea. So, good morning. Nice that you all made it to the first session. What I'm going to present is joint work for one with Björn, Schäpers and Gerhard Lakemeyer from the Knowledge-Based Systems Group, where I'm also coming from, and with Martin Gebser and Torsten Schaub from the University of Potsdam. So, as a motivation, look at these robots, and they're in a virtual factory with stationary machines over here. And these three robots now have to coordinate to run a production in this virtual factory. They produce products like this. So the blue squares are machines. And at those machines, you can do specific production steps. What exactly doesn't matter for us. It's just mounting rings here. And then you have multiple of those orders coming in at runtime. You won't know ahead of time what orders that will be. And those orders will state the configuration of the product, how many you need to deliver, and when to deliver. So there's a start and an end time. So the challenges that we face, we tried this with a couple of approaches, and if we run this with temporal PDDL, we are able to plan for a single product with a single robot. We scale any of those two, we don't get a planned and feasible time. With classic PDDL or ADL, we get 2 to 3 products for all 3 robots, so that's decent, but then we need to post-process the plan to get concurrency for the robots, so they execute it in parallel. And PLAS, which I'm going to talk about towards the end of the talk, can't do any of those. So the challenge is the robots need to decide which products to pursue, so there are more than they can actually do. They have to handle execution and control at runtime, and they need to coordinate the 3 robots, so we want to exploit concurrency. So what we've done is there's a new planning method based on ASP, which I'm going to present, and we have tightly integrated planning and execution in this system. So let's talk about ASP-based time-bounded planning. So first, what is ASP? It's answer set programming. I'm only give a very brief overview for reasons of time. It's a declarative programming language that allows you to state a problem in a logical format, and then there will be a solver that extracts solutions, models for stable models for your logic program, and those are the answer sets that you're going for. And within those answer sets, you will also find the solution to the original problem that you state in your logic program. There are specialized grounders and solvers, and here we use Klingo by the group from Potsdam, and we will rely on some of its advanced features for solving this problem. The basic ideas now for the planning system are that we encode the domain and the search explicitly and directly in the ASP encoding. So there's no PDDL involved, but we go straight for the ASP input language. We do centralized global planning, meaning that there's a single planner who generates a plan for all 3 robots at the same time. We use a time-based planning horizon other than typically the number of actions, and that gives us some benefits, as you will see. We do concurrent planning execution, so we are planning virtually all the time. And what we provide is a general task encoding pattern. There's not a general language such as PDDL to phrase arbitrary problems, but it's a pattern that emerges from how we use the ASP language that you can apply to other problems. So let's look at an ASP program briefly. So you see here the first 2 entries are, the first 4 lines are actually simply facts, so it states just the initial situation. There are 2 robots, and one is at location L1 and one is at location L3. Then we have a few constraint rules. They tell what the goal configuration is. So we want robot 1 to be at L2 and robot 2 to be at L4. We have a single task. It's a drive task, which takes as an input parameter a location. Then we have a description of the effects of these actions. They look a little bit akin to successor state axioms. So we actually phrase how the fluent is going to evolve. Either the robot ends up after a drive task at the location, or the robot is already at the location and doesn't start a new task. And then comes the search declaration. So that's this beast over here. That just means that for each task that we have, it generates one of these begin statements and then gets to pick one out of these for which our R must be a robot and the time must be within the planning horizon. Oh, that's this queue over here. That's our planning horizon. You will see this a little bit further down the road. So lines 11 and 12 do the time handling, so that, and 13 too, so that the time progresses over time as we execute the task. Line 14 makes sure that each robot is only ever doing a single task, and line 15 makes sure that not 2 robots are doing the same task. So that's like the basic structure of what such a logic program would look like, and we may now run this. We actually would get out a plan in the answer set. So how does the overall structure or the flow look like? So first we load the encoding and ground the base program. That's still rather cheap, but when we wait for the team color, we are either playing cyan or magenta, so there are two teams in the environment. We need to ground this plan. That's a rather large program that we need to ground. And that grounding is what really kills us and what is really expensive. And that is also the reason why we cannot reground every time we want to plan. So that's something that we will look out for. We can do this ahead of the game start though. So once we are actually in the solving cycle, it's not so bad anymore. And then we use this, what I will explain in multi-shot solving. So we will run the solver, extract the plan, and execute it. And execution also means distribution to the other robots. I can't speak about this here within the duration of this talk, but you find information about that in the paper, how we actually distribute the plan to the other robots, and also collect the information from the other robots. Robots provide feedback about how the plan is going, so they will tell the planner if it's going over time over a certain threshold, and that can be an indicator to reground and replan. Also another indicator are game events. For example, if you receive a new order from the system, we might actually have a better idea what to do because the other order might be better in terms of value, and then we might want to switch to that order, and that's why we started solving again in that instance. So that's the overall program, and this loop here is actually what we spend most of the time in. That's what we actually want and where we want to spend the time in. It's also important to note that the solving and the execution run concurrently. So it's not one after the other. That's why there's this dashed arrow, but it's actually that those things run in parallel, and whenever we get a new plan, we check if it's still compatible. If it is, we switch to the new plan. If it's not, we start the solver anew. Okay, so how do we represent time? Because that is one of the major issues that we faced. So ASP can handle integers only unless you use theories, which we didn't in this work. So if we use the full game time, which is 900 seconds, in just seconds value, the branching factor gets too large, the progression requires too many updates, and then we just can't do it. So what we did is we discretized time into intervals, and we ran several experiments to determine a good discretization based on this very domain. For the time bound, we specify the time bound as a time and not as a number of steps that we need to do. So what we will do is we accumulate actions for that duration, and once we have found actions for that duration for each of the robots, we are actually done with this planning cycle, and we take the partial plan and start executing it. Empirically determined are these 10 seconds for the time representation and 180 seconds for the time bound. It looks oddly nice, but we have also tried values which look much less nice, but they also didn't perform as well. So these are empirically for that domain determined by running a couple hundred of games. However, this depends on a metric that ensures progress in that time bound. So it's important now to look more on that metric that we are employing. So first, robots are generally oversubscribed. That means they get more orders and more goals than they could possibly achieve within the given time bound. And that's intentional. You want to make the robot to take choices and to also determine what it could actually do. So we need to also have a way to select the goals which we want to pursue. If we go for classical planning, which we did initially, then we only are successful when we actually reached one of the goal states. And that turns out to be one of the problems why we can't find solutions and plans because we just can't reach the goal state in time. However, PPDDL, for example, uses a reward-oriented planning goal. And that's actually what inspired us to use the same in our approach for the symbolic planner. So what we do is we use the metric to implicitly choose goals and steer the search. So there is an evaluation method of the game where you are awarded points for the different products that you can deliver. And we actually broke this down further to have the individual steps that we can take in this plan valued by a part of the points that you get for delivering final products. And this is what I'm showing here in this partial encoding, that we maximize the number of points that we can achieve within the time window. Right? So it does not mean that we do global optimization or global maximization, but we always just try to, within the given time bound and with the planning time window that we can do the best we can. So what we do is we consider the planning already successful if we only get partial plans, so we don't have to reach the final goal state. And again, the metric must ensure this eventual progress within the time bound, or otherwise we just get stalled and won't progress in our overall production. but that's easy to achieve in this domain at least. Now back to multi-shot solving. I already said that grounding is really the expensive part in the RCLL domain, which prevents us from doing full replanning cycles over the game. So grounding can easily take between 30 and 60 seconds. If you have a total game time of just 15 minutes, it's just not feasible to plan all that often. So we ground only the base program during the setup, as I showed before, and this is where most of the expensive parts are done and where lots of things are actually grounded. That looks like this. So this is the time scale, right, from 0 to 600 seconds. And these are the 180 seconds, the black area that we actually planned for. And the orange are just in the future. We will influence that because some of the actions that we will choose will not have ended after 180 seconds, but they will progress into the next time window. But that's fine. So then if there's an event, let's say after 30-something seconds, we take this as our new time zero, and we start solving from that moment on. And how we do this is that for all of the actions that we're currently executing, we are optimistic. We just assume they will continue as we planned before, and they will be successful. And that will be the initial situation that we use for the next planning run. And that will then hopefully also result in a compatible plan. So you restart planning on specific events like new orders coming in. It could also be a robot dropping out, that's also possible, or machines going down. There is a concept called externals that allows us to mark certain things in the program as the solver may not prune or simplify those. And this is what we use to pass in new information later. And that's also what makes the grounding expensive or keeps it at some expense, because those always need to be regrounded when we start a new grounding cycle. But everything else that was grounded before we can just reuse. It's not purged from memory. Once we have been able to get the information that we need, like information about the new order, and we ground the external, we can release it. And that means that actually our solving gets faster the further the game progresses, because we have less of these externals and therefore grounding gets cheaper. And we plan virtually continuously, so we have the solver always running, and when we get a new solution, we check if that's still compatible and then use it, but there's no need actually to completely restart it. That's not what I wanted to show. Okay, so for the evaluation, first I already briefly mentioned PLAS. So that was a system developed by the group in Potsdam where they take PDDL as an input, translate this into an ASP program, and then run this through the solver. But there are several performance issues with that. One is that it generates kind of meta structures based on the PDDL input types, and that makes it rather hard because there's a lot of indirect reasoning involved in the solving process. It couldn't use any advanced heuristics, and there's no control, right? Because you can't specify the control in PDDL. And our system in particular addresses these metastructures issue and a little bit of the control issue. So this is what we gain more over what PLAS has been doing before. So it was simply unsuitable. And what we intend to do is that we take the work I'm presenting today and fold this back into PLAS and use that for the translation later on. We have also run this against PopF in an offline evaluation. So you see here there are two ASP approaches. One is the full approach, so it always does a full planning run similar to a planner. And there's the window approach that I presented here, and there's PopF in its anytime configuration. And what you can see, so we can solve a lot more problems with our approach. That's one thing, but we also trade off make span versus solving time. So, but still our actual evaluation metric, which is not so much make span, but the points we can score, we still do better than PopF. And we've chosen PopF here because it comes readily integrated with ROSPlan, and that gave us a nice advantage. So C0 is the simplest product. It means just take a base product and put a cap on top. C3 is the most complex product that we can do. So you take a product, mount 3 rings, and then a cap. And full set means we give it all the orders that we have. We assume we get them at the beginning and then let it solve it. That makes the unrealistic assumption, though, that the robot travels at a ridiculous speed. It's just as a proof of concept. It's not actually relevant to actual games. However, C3 and C0 are. We also ran this in a large number of games. So this chart represents 2,800 games that we ran on a 6-node cluster over a month or a month and a half. There are various approaches. Here is the approach that I presented today. These two, and Merz and Freiburg, are entries from last year's planning competition that we had. That is a rule-based approach that had been winning for 4 times in a row in the actual robot competition. That's a baseline ROS plan approach, and that was something based on actor sum on goal reasoning. And what you can see is that it's actually doing fairly well. Especially what is interesting for the overall evaluation turns out to be the median, which is the red line for these box plots. So there we could actually show that the rule-based approach, which had been handcrafted over a couple of years, still outperformed ASP. But other than that, it could top any of the other approaches that we had tried in the tournament. Okay, so to conclude, I've showed you today an ASP-based time-bounded planning approach for centralized global planning. We directly and explicitly encode the problem in ASP. And we use Klingo for multi-shot solving, which we require for efficiency, otherwise it's still infeasible. We have a combined search and domain spec. Our time bound is given as an actual time and not as the number of steps. And we rely on a metric to steer the goal selection and optimize for these goals within a given time bound. And we accept partial solutions already. And actually it's currently running in this year's iteration of the competition, so the round robin results will come out today noon. So I think I'm allowed to say it's doing fairly well. So thank you.
Some minutes for question. Who is the first?
Thanks for the nice talk. Do you exploit somehow the fact that you get many solutions or that you get an answer set? I mean, can you exploit that better maybe to avoid recomputing the plan?
So answer set does not mean we get multiple plans within the answer set. It just, so it's a number, so the whole model makes up the answer set, right? So we always ever get one solution, but we keep on solving and then we might find better solution based on the optimization metric. And when we achieve this, then we actually try to switch to this new plan, which turned out to be better according to our metric, if it's still compatible with what the robot have been doing in the meantime.
So you don't exploit the answer set per se in any particular way? The possible alternative instantiation of variables.
You don't get all the answers at the same time, right? They only come in time after time, and in that sense we do.
I see. Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
All right.
Other question? I have a question about exploiting logic programming approach allows you to have much more flexibility with respect to the, let's say, the starting point. So in PDDL you have fixed times, you cannot exploit temporal flexibility in the specification. Did you consider, for instance, there are several other approaches that consider, for instance, with Golog or with linear time logic, other approaches to have a more flexible description of the planning domain and then exploit this flexibility for the execution?
Yeah, so you mentioned Golog, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually tried that, and it doesn't work very well. And part of the problem is that the search that we can actually do there is not very optimized. And also when you use it for execution, the execution systems we have so far are too fragile. So they break too easily. For example, if you have a concurrent execution and you run into some branch where you hit a dead end or an error occurs, that branch will just stay there and then you can switch to another branch, but that is never going to resolve unless you completely restart. So that really didn't work. But LTL approaches we didn't try yet.
Okay, thanks. There is time for another quick question. Okay, well, thanks again to team.